There is a photograph somewhere, maybe in a shoebox or buried in someone's phone camera roll, of you at around 4 or 5 years old. You are standing in a garden or next to a birthday cake or squinting into the sun at a beach. And when you look at it, something odd happens. You recognize the child. You know it is you, but you cannot feel it. There is no memory attached to that moment, no sense of being inside it, no echo of what the grass smelled like or what you were thinking about half a second before the shutter clicked. It is like looking at a photograph of a stranger who happens to share your face. Most of us have experienced this. We know in theory that we were there for the first several years of our lives. We were awake, we were curious, we were forming attachments and learning language and having feelings that were enormous to us at the time, and yet almost none of it survives. Not really. You might have a handful of images, fragments that feel more like watching a film clip than remembering something you lived through. But the texture of daily life before the age of 6 or 7 is mostly just gone. This is the thing people often find quietly unsettling when they stop to think about it. Not just that childhood memories fade, because all memories fade over time, but that the earliest years, the ones that researchers and therapists often describe as the most formative years of your life, are also the ones you can access least. The years that supposedly shape so much of who you are also the years you remember almost nothing of. That seems like a strange contradiction, and it is worth understanding why it happens. The phenomenon has a name in psychology: childhood amnesia, sometimes called infantile amnesia. It refers specifically to the near total absence of autobiographical memories from the first 2 to 3 years of life, and the patchy, unreliable nature of memories from ages 3 to 6 or 7. This is not unique to people who had difficult childhoods or who experienced trauma. It happens to almost everyone across cultures and backgrounds. The forgetting is not personal, it is structural. The clearest explanation has to do with how memory actually works, and specifically with a part of the brain called the hippocampus. The hippocampus is involved in taking experiences and converting them into long-term memories, the kind you can consciously retrieve later. In very young children, the hippocampus is still developing. It is not yet doing that job efficiently. So even though a 2-year-old is absolutely experiencing things, having preferences, feeling fear or delight or comfort, the machinery that would preserve those experiences as retrievable memories is not yet fully operational. The experiences happen. They just do not get filed away in a way the adult brain can later find them. Think of it a little like taking photographs without a memory card in the camera. Something real is happening in front of the lens. The light is entering. But without the right storage in place, nothing is saved. There is also a language factor, and this one is particularly interesting. Most of the memories we carry into adulthood are narrative memories. They have a shape, a beginning, a context, a sequence of events. They are stories we can tell, at least to ourselves. But very young children do not yet have the language to construct that kind of narrative around their experiences. When you do not have words for something, it is much harder to encode it in the kind of organized, retrievable way that allows you to find it again later. Language gives memory a skeleton. Without it, experience tends to remain diffuse and unanchored. This is part of why the memories people do have from early childhood often feel so strange and impressionistic. A color, a smell, the feeling of a texture without knowing what it was, a sense of emotional tone without any accompanying story. These fragments survive because they do not depend on language or narrative. They are sensory imprints rather than organized memories, and they tend to be vivid in an odd, sourceless way, like a word you know without knowing where you learned it. There is another layer to this, and it takes us into something a little more subtle. Around the age of 5 or 6, most children go through a significant developmental shifts. Their sense of self becomes more continuous. They begin to understand that they are the same person who existed yesterday and who will exist tomorrow. A genuine autobiographical self starts to form. And something about that shift actually seems to displace earlier memories. As the new, more organized self-concept settles into place, the fragmented experiences of earlier years get crowded out or overwritten. It is not quite erasure, but it functions a little like it. Some researchers have also pointed to the role of adults in memory formation. The way a parent or caregiver talks to a child about shared experiences helps the child learn how to remember. Families who talk often about things they did together, who revisit and narrate shared moments, tend to produce children who carry more detailed early memories. The memory is partly a social construction. It gets built in conversation, which means that if your early childhood was quiet, or if the adults around you did not tend to revisit the past in words, your memories from those years may be thinner still. None of this means the early years did not matter. This is perhaps the most important thing to hold alongside the science. The experiences you cannot consciously remember still shaped you. Attachment styles, the basic emotional templates you carry into relationships, are largely formed in the first years of life. The felt sense of whether the world is safe or unpredictable, whether people can be trusted, whether your needs are likely to be met, all of that begins very early. It simply does not live in the part of the brain you can access through deliberate recall. It lives in something more like the body, in reflexes and default responses, and the particular way your nervous system reacts to certain situations before your thinking mind has had a chance to catch up. This is why some things feel inexplicably familiar, or why certain kinds of relationships feel effortless and others feel instinctively tense without you being able to point to a clear reason. The reason is there. It just formed before you had the language or the developmental capacity to store it as a story you can tell. So what do you do with that? Not much, perhaps, in terms of recovering what is lost. The memories themselves are mostly gone, and that is simply true. No amount of effort is likely to retrieve them in any reliable way. But there is something useful in understanding this clearly. The first thing is to stop taking the gaps personally. The absence of early memory is not a sign that those years were unremarkable, or that you were not paying attention, or that something is wrong with you. It is a feature of how human brains develop. You are not missing something other people have. You are in the same position as almost everyone else. The second thing is to pay gentle attention to the fragments you do have, not to analyze them aggressively or try to force them into explanations, but just to notice what they are. A recurring image, a feeling that attaches to a particular place or smell. These fragments, however small, are the traces that made it through. They are worth sitting with quietly, not as clues to decode, but as small, honest remnants of a life you were already living before you knew you were living it. And the third thing is perhaps the most practical. If you find yourself reacting to something in your adult life in ways that feel outsized or confusing, a relationship pattern that keeps repeating, a kind of fear that arrives without a clear cause, a comfort you seek in particular and very specific situations, it might be worth allowing the possibility that the origin is simply earlier than your memory goes. That is not a reason to feel stuck. It is actually a reason to be a little more patient with yourself. The roots of some things go deep enough that you cannot see where they begin. That does not make them unworkable. It just means they require a different kind of attention. As with anything in this space, if these questions bring up something that feels heavy or persistent, talking to a therapist is always worth considering. This is general insight, not a substitute for professional support. There is something quietly freeing, though, in accepting that you cannot remember most of your beginning. You were there for all of it. You felt it. It formed you in ways that are still operating today. And the fact that you cannot recall it does not mean it did not count. It counted before you had a word for counting, before you had a self that knew it was being shaped. That might be the most honest thing to say about early childhood. It happened to someone who was entirely you and who had no idea yet what kind of person they were becoming. If something in today's episode felt like it named something you have been quietly carrying, consider subscribing. There is more of this kind of conversation here whenever you need it.